Hello, everyone. I'm Tiffany Farrell, President of Southern Maryland Audubon Society. Thank you for joining our Audubon chapter for the monthly program, Alaska, Birds, Mammals, and Vast Vistas. Our presenter tonight is one of our own. David Moulton has been our volunteer field trip coordinator for the last 7 years and has also led many SMA's field trips himself. He has also initiated a volunteer project to save grassland birds here in Southern Maryland by educating landowners and farmers about bird-friendly hay mowing. Tonight, through the wonders of Zoom technology, David will help us temporarily escape the clutches of COVID by sharing what he calls his dream birding experience, 18 days in Alaska on a tour led by two of the world's best bird guides. So let's head out to the last frontier where birders can see curlews and ptarmigans, wagtails and murrelets, and a bunch of other birds that will probably never make it to Maryland. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Tiffany, and welcome everybody. So this will be a narrated slideshow for the first half or so, and it works best if we hold questions till after that is over, but we should have plenty of time for Q&A. And then at the very end, I've got a little video with music that will be a nice little reprise to send everybody home. So that's how we intend to proceed. So I'm about to share the screen, and we'll get started here. So here we go. Oh, that's the wrong one. That's the video. All right. Okay. So assuming everyone can hear me, this summer in June, I took a trip with a tour group called Field Guides. So some of you may have taken field guide trips before. They're a well-known birding tour group out of Tucson, Arizona. And the two guides were Tom Johnson, who's a very active Eastern birder, but birds all over the world. He spends most of his time on Cape May, and then Doug Goschfeld, who's also spent a lot of time up in Alaska himself. So we had two excellent guides and 14 people, and we were in that little zone there in June when we were coming out of COVID with vaccinations. Everyone had to be vaccinated, and we hadn't yet gone into the next Delta version of COVID. So, it really was a very lucky opportunity that we were able to go ahead at the time. I don't know whether that would happen right now, but we'll see. So here is where we spent our time. And you can see Alaska is vast. We flew into Anchorage, and that was our base, but then we had these sort of spokes off of Anchorage that took us to hotspots, the key hotspots for the trip. But things went wrong actually just even before the trip began, insofar as we had been scheduled to go to the Pribilofs out to St. Paul Island, which where you get incredible rarities coming over from, Siberia and Russia, red-legged kittiwakes and other birds that you're not going to find elsewhere in Alaska. And it's controlled by the Native American tribe up there, and they decided to cancel their tourist season that year. Even though we were all vaccinated, they said, nope, not out here. We're not going to take the risk. So that leg of the trip got knocked off and got replaced with a leg that went down to Homer, which this is the Kenai Peninsula right here. And Homer was what got added. That little arrow points to where Homer is. So that was a substitute leg there. And we'll talk later about the loss of our trip to Barrow. That was a function of fog. In Barrow, we were on a very modern jet and flying into Barrow in order to see, you know, Steller's eiders and Ross's gulls and spectacle eiders, and they wouldn't let us land. The captain wouldn't land, and he did 2 circles and said we can't land, and took us back to Anchorage. So that was quite a blow. You can imagine if you were the leaders of this trip, what a panic that would send you into. How are we going to deal with this? And but those were 2 legs that we lost, and you would think that would have been pretty much a bust for the trip. But you know, we still had Denali, and we still had Nome, and still had Denali, still had Nome, and still had Homer and Seward down here on the Kenai. So that is what we did. Covering Alaska is tough. You have transportation problems if you're on small planes, but I was surprised we had transportation problems even on a big plane. Here's what you see coming in. It's just an incredibly magnificent and vast land with these mountain ranges, snow-capped peaks, tundra, incredible forests, and just, this is an escarpment in the Kenai Fjord National Park, picture taken from the water. Everything is big, everything is vast, everything is impressive, and it also makes for a extraordinary experience, even if you weren't a birder. But everyone on our trip was birders. Even the spouses were birders on this trip. So you had this landscape that just took your breath away. And then you would run into mammals that were a lot of fun, even before you got to paying attention to birds. Sea otters here, some elephant seals, salmon running up the creek, lots of moose, big moose, little moose, moose everywhere. So it's a lot going on to see even before you get to the birds. And of course you had bears. We had these grizzly bears up there in Alaska are this golden color, which is kind of neat. And you can spot them on the tundra sometimes from quite a distance. This was up a long ways away through a scope. This guy was very much up close, black bear, but was not at all threatened by our van and just let us take a lot of pictures from the van. This was a pine marten we ran into just before we stumbled on our spruce grouse. So this was in the forest, and a very unusual mammal to see because they're so shy. So we had this vast landscape and these incredible mammals, including this guy, muskox. Muskox are quite common up and around Nome and north of there. Reintroduced after they lost all their muskox in the turn of the century. There were no muskox, and they reintroduced them in the 50s. And they've taken off. They're doing quite well. And so they've reestablished the population in Alaska. This was our group looking out over a mud flat. You can sort of see the general size of the group. Just getting started here in Anchorage. So the first, as I mentioned, the first leg of the trip was down to Homer, which is down here. Anchorage is kind of just off the map here, and we drive down this road to Homer. And on the way, we stopped off at Storiski Creek, where I was able to see my first life bird. which was not a Canada jay. It was an Aleutian tern, which I think is coming up soon. Blackback woodpecker. So here is one of the leaders digiscoping that blackback woodpecker. This is Doug Goschfeld outside of Homer. This was rather remarkable. We found the sandhill crane trying to get into this office building, or appearing to be trying to do so. Just in the village of Homer. So look how rusty this bird is. They, on the way north, they spend a lot of time preening in mud that has a lot of iron in it, and they take on this very rusty color. So by the time they get up here to the breeding grounds, they're not the gray we're sort of used to. Here's the golden crowned sparrow. They sort of replaced the white crowns up there, and bird with a beautiful song. A lot of them around Homer and elsewhere in Alaska. Here's the Aleutian tern, my first lifer, which we saw on the way down to Homer. They nest in the tundra just off of the bay, and then fly down to the bay for foraging, and then back up to the tundra. This is a version of the bay around Homer. We went out on a boat, which I'll show you in a minute. Not that boat. We went out on a boat into this bay and went to a gull island here, and then back to Homer. This boat was just abandoned, as so much is in Alaska. The equipment, you'll see some mining equipment later and other big things, railroad cars and other stuff that just gets abandoned. It doesn't decay very fast. And so you get a lot of detritus just sitting on the tundra up there. This is the boat we took out into Kachemak Bay in Homer, and seabirds, pelagic cormorants here, and black-legged kittiwakes, which were truly abundant. You'll see this gull island here, which is almost all black-legged kittiwakes right there. So the abundance of some of these species was remarkable. Here's some murres. Interesting here. These are all common murres, except for this one big guy in the middle, who you can see has a bright white side, is slightly larger, is black head instead of a brown head. So many fewer of those than the common, but the thick-billed murre was in there too. Tufted puffins, horned puffins, amazing puffins up there. In the bay, we had marbled murrelets, which are incredible little birds that come down to the bay by day, and during nesting season will fly into the forest many miles and nest in trees. And then we ran into this guy, which turned out to be a bird that even the leaders had never seen before. It was a life bird for them, a long-billed murrelet. Looks a lot like the marbled murrelet, but it's the markings down its throat are different, and very unusual bird. And so people were very excited about that, but the leaders most excited of all, because the rest of us, this was not a bird that was on anybody's list that we were going to see. So it's sort of, you get very excited about the birds you want to see, and you know months ahead of time. When you run into a bird this rare, it's sort of you don't know quite how to process it. So that was exciting. So after Homer, we came back up to Anchorage and took the vans up to Denali, which, as you can see, is sort of a drive north, a few hours north of Anchorage. Denali is a huge park, but difficult to access in the traditional way, which most people are used to going to parks these days and driving around. DENALI years and years ago, I think 20 years ago, decided we're not going to let everybody drive through this park. We're going to do a bus system. And so they imposed this bus system. You can, if you're a hiker, take a hiker's bus and go anywhere along this road, which is 80 miles long, and start hiking and not have to worry about the tourist bus. But tourist bus with groups like ours, we're on a tourist bus, and we have a guide, a interpreter from the park who drives and talks, and they're very good. They do a good job. And by not having any cars, very few cars going up and down this road, the animals, the mammals and the birds are a lot calmer than I think, and easier to see than in many other parks. But yeah, that's the system they use here. If you happen to be someone who makes a reservation to stay at this lodge out here, those are the only people who get to drive all the way out to this 89-mile mark. So I guess that's another way to do it. But most people are on the bus. And it's a huge treeless tundra up here in DENALI. And you can see great distances. This is the bus that we were on, or like the bus we were on. Notice there's these things are cameras that the driver will use, and he's able to manipulate them and show birds and mammals that way to people who have little screens above the seats. And sometimes that's very important, because sometimes, you know, what we are looking at through our binoculars is a long ways away. Here's some caribou on a ridge. But people who don't have binoculars, or, you know, just can't find the animals because they're so far away, they do have the bus driver showing them this on the screen above them. So it's a pretty good system. Keeps everybody happy. They don't want to miss anything. Again, just an incredible landscape here. We actually spotted a bear right there, which you ended up being able to see through the telescope. But again, the only reason you could see that bear was he is that golden color I mentioned before. And if that were a brown bear, we never would have seen him. Ptarmigans, the willow ptarmigan. And trumpeter swans breed up there in the lakes. Hawk owls are a common owl up there, or not rare. And so many birds up there you see sitting on top of these spruces. It's not just the owls that do that. The thrushes do that, and the shrikes do that, and the redpolls do that. So, you got all these little spruce trees, and you just look at the tops of the spruce trees, and that's usually where the bird is. Magpies get all the way up into Alaska, and we're around Nome, and all the way up to Nome. We had Bohemian waxwings in DENALI. Swainson's thrushes breed up there. Very common thrush. They're singing everywhere. And here is the mountain itself, which there's no guarantee you'll see this mountain if you ever go to DENALI. Only a third of the people who visit DENALI actually see it, because it is enshrouded. It's got its own weather, and it's pretty much shrouded in clouds and fog most of the time, 2/3 of the time anyway. But we were lucky, and on our way out, we got this beautiful view of the mountain. 20,000 feet. So after DENALI, the next leg was up to Nome here, which is very close to Russia. That's Russia beginning right there. It is not north of the Arctic Circle. The Arctic Circle comes along right about here, but it's pretty close to it. And Nome is a really fantastic birding area. You can't go very far by car out of Nome. There's this Teller Road, and there's the road that you take up to see the Bristletide Curlew and the Council Road, which we've used to see. We went down to see a gyrfalcon, but basically these roads have ends and everyone turns around and comes back to Nome. Nome, here's a gold dredge. That's Nome's claim to fame, other than the Iditarod. They're the end of the Iditarod sled dog race every year. But gold mining is where was the boom for Nome. And when the gold mining was over, these dredges got left behind, and they're still dotting the landscape. Our little inn was called the Sluice Box. You know, gold miners use sluices. Here's the marker of the end of the Iditarod race, finish line. And this was a life bird for me. You can see a long-tailed jaeger down here if you're lucky out in the ocean, but up there, they're nesting right around town and very common. And they're a beautiful, elegant bird when they're in breeding plumage like this with the long streamer tail. Red-throated loons are nesting everywhere. They were common nesters in Anchorage too. Here's a Sabin's gull. We had a whole flock of them fly by. Here's the gyrfalcon that we found. Somebody, our guide Doug, spotted it. Everyone got out and looked through the telescope. That's the best view you could get with a camera, with my camera anyway. But it was pretty tough to get a good shot of them. Nothing as clear as that, but it was our gyrfalcon. So we ran into a short-eared owl just sitting on a bush up there. On our way up to, there's a godwit. We had godwits right around Nome too, in the river mouth. Here is one of the Transberingian specialties that everyone wants to see when they're up there in Nome. Transberingian meaning across the Bering Strait. So these birds spend most of their lives in Siberia and beyond. But when they breed, they come up through Russia and cross over the Bering Strait and just barely get into Alaska and breed there. And so it's a specialty that you really want to see, and everyone wants to see when they're in Nome. The blue throat, the Arctic warbler falls into the same category. It just gets over the straits and breeds here. Beautiful singing bird here. And of course, the curlew is another Transberingian specialty, although in its case, it goes down to the Southern Pacific to breed. The rock ptarmigans, we managed to find one of these. It's not an easy feat. They're so well disguised. And we had one jump up from under the car when we were going up a dirt road. So it only flew about 20 feet and then dropped down into the rocks and, pretends you can't see them. And all the ptarmigans kind of do that. Here was the mountain that we had to climb to try to find the Bristletide curlew. It is not smooth. That is all tussocks and wet tussocks. You're wearing boots. You're kind of slogging your way up here. There are a lot of whimbrels that breed here too, and you can confuse the two. So you have to search for the Bristletide. And if the weather is all bad, and it often is up here, people don't see it. But we were lucky. We had a good day, and we were even luckier insofar as about 2/3 of the way up here, there was a couple of photographers lying down on the tundra with big camera lenses. And so we pretty much knew where the Bristletide was at that point, and we just made our ways over to those fellows, and we saw this bird, which is, there are not many of them left. They do look a lot like a whimbrel, but they have a different call. Beautiful bird. So that was the Nome. I was very happy about that. That was our, our gotta see bird in Nome. So then we came back to Anchorage and went down this other way, down the other side of the Kenai Peninsula to the Kenai Fjords National Park. So we got to Seward and took a boat out in Resurrection Bay through these islands here, and that glacier I showed you earlier is right in that bay right there. And some fantastic scenery here. This is Seward Harbor. This kind of reminded me of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, but bigger, and amazing mountains and glaciers up there. So here's some bird rocks. These are red-faced cormorants, a life bird for me. Diagnostic is that little white patch at the back. And we just had those two fly by. Those are the only two we saw. Here are some orcas we had here in the bay. Got pretty close to them. Parakeet AUKLETS. So this is all in Kenai Fjords National Park, and this is the Ayalik Glacier, where that's an active glacier. And in fact, there was some calving going on while we were there. You can see how close this boat here in the corner here is. You can get pretty close to that glacier. And kittlets, merlets nest up along the edges of this glacier, up along the sides in the tundra. So this is part of their ecosystem. And that was a life bird. Sea otters, horned puffins. And then we did some land birding here around Seward. We had the Townsend's warbler, dippers, cool birds. This big mossy area here is their nest under a bridge. So that's a dipper nest. That bird is bringing a little food to the chicks that are in there. One of the chicks was out here on a rock. Cute little bird. So dippers, as you know, spend all their time in these rushing streams. So do the harlequin ducks. We're kind of used down here in Maryland, we're kind of used to making the trek this time of year out to Ocean City to try to see one of these birds. That's where they spend the winter, in the ocean, but in the summer, they're nesting on these mountain streams. So after Kenai and the national park there, I went back to Anchorage, and we're ready to do our last leg, which was the one to Barrow. But as I mentioned earlier, no landing. We could not land because of fog. So we never made it to Barrow, and we had to try to make up for it just in the Anchorage area. This is where the talent and skill of our guides became very important. We had not yet seen a spruce grouse at this point, and this was an 18-day trip. This is a long trip. And when you reach day 17 and you still don't have a spruce grouse, everyone's getting anxious about the spruce grouse. So that was one of the goals in Anchorage, and we found one. This was a mother, and some chicks had flown up when it flushed, and we all got great looks at her. Here's the paparazzi, the spruce grouse paparazzi, and but nearby on another branch, on two other branches, were two of the chicks. There's one right there. So cute little bird there, waiting for mom to tell him what to do next. So we got our spruce grouse, and we then we're lucky enough to get a white-tailed ptarmigan, which is not the, that's the one you can see down here, but this one was an exciting bird for us to see at the time. And we got beautiful looks at it. It had flown down out of this snowfield because I think the skiers flushed it and gave us wonderful views. Again, they're hard to see once they blend into the landscape. But look at that. You can see the little red eyelid on that bird. So that is my presentation of what I saw and experienced up there. I had, as you can say, 18 days. We had 165 species, 20 species of mammals, and a spectacular trip in a wild landscape. I really, for those who haven't been there, it's just, you got to find a way. Somehow you got to find a way to get there because there's nothing like it. So voila.
That is awesome, David. Wow. How did you get so many wonderful photos?
Well, some of these photos I grabbed from the best photographer in the group, which was Eric Gustafson, who was one of the participants. He wasn't the leader, but Doug Goschfeld is. You'll see when we get to my reprise of this, when I show a little video at the end of tonight's presentation. Doug Goschfeld put that together, so you'll see what a real photographer can do. But I did my best.
You did a great job. That sounds like such an exciting trip. I love the pictures of the chicks. That is just awesome.
So the logistics, it's hard to get there. It's expensive. Once you're there, it's expensive to get around. So there is that. I had one of my best friends and his wife drove all the way up there, all the way to Nome, all on their own, to see the bristle-thighed curlew, and they didn't get it. And it's, so the value having invested that much time and effort to get there, you're doubly disappointed when you can't find things. And so having two guides and, professionals who are not only finding the birds in real time for you, but also being, in these networks, there's networks of guides. So they all talk to each other and they're all leading trips up there and they share information about what they're seeing. And so, they can find things, they know where to look. Let's put it that way. They know where to look, where you're never going to know that on your own. So taking an organized trip, I think is really the way to go, but they are expensive trips. And 18 days is a long stretch.
That's right. Molly has a question in the chat for you, David. She asked if you could talk a little bit about how much hiking and boating were involved in reaching the birds.
So let's see. In Homer, no hiking to speak of, but we did go out on a boat. We didn't go out the first day because it was too rough. Fortunately, the next day wasn't rough at all. So, but you take seasick pills if you need to, and out you go. You might want, some people take seasick pills for the long drives, like it was a long drive up to Denali. So there's the driving, but there was no hiking in Denali either because of the bus, because you're on the bus when you're in the park, and otherwise you're in your van, just stopping along the road and scoping at things. There was some hiking up in Nome. We hiked for the bristle-thighed curlew. That everyone sort of anticipates that, brings the gear that you need for that and so forth. It's just hard to walk because the tundra is so wet and tussocky. And so that can be a hard hike depending on the weather. But I mean, I say hard compared to other things we were doing, but it's not really a hard hike from a hiker's perspective. It's just a slog. No other long walks around Nome. Yeah, I think that's basically was that. You don't, and you know, the guides say, look, if you don't think you can do the hike, don't worry about it. You know, that's what you have to do to see this curlew, but we don't want anyone to try to do something they can't do otherwise. And so some people, well, I don't think anyone in our group didn't go, but it is something they anticipate always, that there'll be some people that just aren't ready for it. So that's what I'd say.
Excellent. There are a couple of comments. Lynn thanks you so much for the flashback. She says she's been there twice, but was a baby birder at the time.
Oh, Lynn,
And
twice.
she said she'll never forget the vistas.
Yeah, so many people, when they go to Vancouver or, you know, Seattle and take the ship and, you know, up to Glacier Bay and back down. And, you know, we were well north of that the entire time. So I've never done that. But it's a big state. So it's a lot to cover.
Yeah. Nancy says she enjoyed your presentation, especially the Anchorage and Kenai Peninsula part of it, and about Denali. Phineas asks, how was the food on the trip?
Well, the food was okay. I mean, no one expected really good food. They sort of, you're staying in medium priced hotels at best. The best hotel we were in was the one they had to put us in when the barrel leg got canceled. So we were in a Marriott at that point. But they had lots of food in the bus. So it was sort of a lot of snacking going on a lot of the time. They drive you pretty hard. You're getting up early. You're getting up at 5:30 to leave at 6, and often. And then you might be out at night looking for owls and night birds. So you get a little bit of time often to a break in the late afternoon, but you're going out, and especially in Alaska, because the light is still good. You're going out to bird after dinner usually.
Wow, that's very cool. But it sounds exhausting.
It tires you out.
Yeah, Jane and Tyler ask its question, how uncommon is pulling the ptarmigan hat trick?
I don't know, but we were lucky to do it, and wouldn't have if, again, because of the barrel cancellation, we had to work hard around Anchorage to find birds that were you know, going to impress the tour group. The leaders had to work hard on that. So they wanted to find this ptarmigan. So we found the white-tailed there. I'll tell you this joke, this little bit off-color joke. You can bleep this from the recording later if you want, Tiffany. The skiers came down and saw us all with our telescopes staring at this bird. And they said, with sort of without missing a beat, what sound does a ptarmigan make when it takes a pee? And we all couldn't think of it. And so they said, nothing, the pee is silent. So we were pretty impressed that these two skiers had a ptarmigan joke at the, you know, ready to go for this occasion.
I guess they were locals, huh? If they
were
that.
Locals.
That's awesome. Molly asks if June is the optimum time to go, or if that date was chosen for some reason related to COVID.
Yeah, no, this was the prime season. They have a, I think the first trip they take up to Alaska starts in late May. You know, with 2 different leaders, and then they did our group. So it's somewhere in that late May to mid-June is when most of the groups show up there. It's a lot of groups, kind of sometimes in the same hotels we were in. You run into different groups, and they all seem to go then for, you know, your first introduction to Alaska. Then people start talking about going to places like Barrow in the fall to see the ivory gulls or the Ross's gulls, and then so it's that's the best time to go. You're trying to get the good weather and the good birds, and I think that's the optimal. How many people, I wonder how many people in this group actually have been up there, like Lynn? The
Is there anyone else? You can write it in the chat if you don't want to speak.
The only other place I had ever been in Alaska, I hadn't really had a chance to bird. I was lucky enough to go up to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge when I was working as a staff member in Congress. And that is way up there, kind of up there north of the Arctic Circle, well north of the Arctic Circle, 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle, and an amazing landscape. So I had a sense of how large the place was, but this was finally great to drill down and get the birds that I had missed the first time up.
It looks like we've had a couple folks go. Jane and Tyler say they've been up there. Looks like Brenda raised her hand. I guess that means she's been up there. Cindy and Rita will be going this coming July.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah. Paul says in 2015, he did 3 weeks with Vent.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
And Jack and Susan went in 2000 with Canning River Wilderness rafting trip.
Ah,
So that's exciting too.
yeah.
Yay. Okay, well, it seems like we've got a lot of folks who've been or are going. Oh, Nancy says she joined the presentation to help pre-plan an upcoming trip.
Good. Well, if anyone wants to follow up with me on details like that, I'd be happy to chat.
Steve and Betty Arthur said they were up there in 2012 and had a fabulous visit to Denali.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Did you see the mountain, Steve?
They haven't written back in the, yes,
Okay.
yes, they
Yes.
did.
Good.
They did. Awesome. Are there any other questions? Oh, Lynn says she saw it too. Marcia says she went in 2000 with High Lonesome Echo Tours with a similar itinerary, Anchorage, Homer, Seward, Denali.
Oh, good. Yeah, so this all looked familiar to you, Marcia, I'm sure.
Yes, we did a lot of hiking though.
Really?
We did.
In whereabouts, in Nome or elsewhere?
Pretty much everywhere we went. Forrest Davis is the leader of that business and
Right.
he likes to walk. So we did not long hikes, but maybe 2-3 miles at a time. We hiked up onto a glacier, which was very cool.
Yeah, neat.
Excellent. So how many people were in your group, David?
We had, well, 12 and then for the first half and then 14. So 2 people came for just the second half.
Oh, good.
So we had 2 we had 2 vans, and so there was that. There are logistical problems, you know, one van will see a bird and the other sometimes might miss it if they don't work very hard to make sure it happens. So that makes it harder for the leaders, but they do everything they can to make sure everybody sees what they see.
That's good. It's a challenge, though.
Yeah.
Jane and Tyler said they saw Denali from the plane coming into Anchorage. The pilot actually spun the plane so both sides of the plane could actually see
Uh-huh.
the mountain.
Yeah.
So
Well, now that you mention it, we saw it going up to Barrow and back down to Anchorage. We never saw Barrow, though.
you know, I had a similar experience, David, when I was going from Vancouver up to another part of British Columbia to go see the spirit bear. You and I have had that conversation before
Yes.
about that trip. And on the day we were scheduled to fly into the area where we were staying in the lodge, we couldn't get in. It was just too foggy. The pilot tried 2 or 3 times and could not land the plane.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I lost a whole day. We had to go back to Vancouver and then fly out again the next
Yeah.
day.
Well,
So-
the islands that out there in the Bering Sea that people like to go to, there are a number of them, not just St. Paul, that are great bird islands. But the reason everyone goes to St. Paul is that's the only one that has any kind of regular flights to it. So, you know, some of the Aleutian Islands and some of the other islands in the Bering Sea you can get to and are great for birding, but you often can't get off of them. And because there's only like 1 flight a week or 2 flights a week. And if you miss it, you could be there for a long stretch of time that you weren't planning to. And not a lot to do other than bird there. So you can keep birding, but that can really screw you up. So it is difficult to plan when you start to go to those other places.
Yeah,
So
it's just you're at the mercy of the weather. You know?
Yeah.
Brenda says she did a train trip from Anchorage to Fairbanks and loved the bus trip to Denali.
Uh-huh.
Brenda, did you do any birding? I guess I'll wait for her answer. Another participant, I don't know the first name, Garrett, says my father was stationed in the Air Force in Nome and Barrow. He was a weatherman. That's cool. His job was to forecast low fog days so transport planes could fly in. Someday I'll get to Alaska. Oh, that's Lisa. Garrett. Wow, that's very cool.
Well, I noticed some people are starting to drop. We might want to do the reprise before we lose too many.
Okay, that sounds great.
I'm going to
Sounds good.
share a different slide here, So now you're going to get the professional version and it'll impress you. Here we go.
What are we dealing with there? What just happened?
Pretty neat, huh?
Very, very cool. Thank you so very much, David, for your presentation and your time tonight. This has been so fascinating. And you've got other praise coming in through the chat. Anyone else have any final comments? I guess we're ready to sign off. Thank you again, David. This was amazing. We were so grateful to have you.
Okay, well, it was a lot of fun. And again, if anyone is planning a trip and wants to, share itineraries or whatever, I'd be glad to talk to them.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Take care.